The radar screen showed something impossible. Four F-15 Eagles maintaining perfect formation at 28,000 feet over Nevada's restricted airspace, but according to flight control, only 3 aircraft had been cleared for the exercise. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus, Viper, Rodriguez stared at the green blip that shouldn't exist, his coffee growing cold in the cramped cockpit of his Strike Eagle. The mystery 4th aircraft held position with mathematical precision, neither advancing nor retreating, like a ghost shadowing their training mission. Control, Viper 1-1. Confirm 4 birds on scope. My count shows an extra eagle in the nest. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio, breaking the morning silence that had settled over Nelly's Air Force Base's range complex. Below them, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly, its sun-baked surface hiding decades of military secrets beneath shifting sands and sage brush. The response came after a pause too long for comfort. Viper 1-1 control. We show 3 aircraft on station. Advise you check your instruments. But Rodriguez trusted his eyes more than ground control's bureaucratic certainty. 22 years of flying had taught him the difference between electronic ghosts and something real stalking the sky. Ghost lead, this is Viper 1-1. Show yourself. His call echoed into empty air, met only by the distant hum of jet engines and the whisper of wind across titanium wings. The formation ahead maintained course, seemingly oblivious to his presence, but Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. The 4th aircraft's positioning wasn't random. It flew in the exact spot where Captain Alina, Riptide, Vasquez had been killed 18 months ago during a training accident that still haunted every pilot on base. The morning sun caught the mystery jet's canopy, sending a brief flash of light that reminded Rodriguez of a signal mirror. For one impossible moment, he could swear he saw the silhouette of a pilot's helmet through the glare. The aircraft banked slightly, revealing the distinct profile of an F-15C Eagle, its gray-blue camouflage scheme somehow different from standard Air Force paint. More weathered, more experienced. Rodriguez felt his throat tighten. Alina had been his student once, before she'd surpassed him in skill, and earned the respect of every pilot who'd ever flown with her. Her call sign, Riptide, had come from her ability to appear from nowhere during exercises, striking with precision that left senior officers speechless. She'd been the best natural pilot Rodriguez had ever seen, and her death had left a hole in the squadron that no amount of training could fill. Now something wearing her ghost was flying formation with the living, and Rodriguez couldn't decide if he was witnessing a miracle or losing his mind at altitude. The mystery deepened as he watched the 4th aircraft execute a turn so smooth it seemed to defy physics, maintaining perfect spacing, while the other 3 Eagles struggled to match its grace. The radio crackled again, but this time the voice that emerged would change everything Rodriguez thought he knew about the pilot they'd buried with full military honors. A voice that belonged to someone who was supposed to be dead, speaking words that would force the entire Air Force to confront a secret they'd buried deeper than any grave. Viper 1-1, Ghost Lead. Permission to rejoin the land of the living. The transmission lasted exactly 3 seconds before dissolving into static, but those 7 words carried enough electricity to power Las Vegas. Rodriguez's hands trembled on the stick as he recognized the voice that had once called him "old man" during training flights, the same voice that had laughed at his terrible jokes in the officers' club, the same voice that had screamed his name over the radio during her final flight. Alina Vasquez was alive, and she was flying again. But the how and why of her impossible resurrection would prove more complex than any mission briefing could prepare him for. Somewhere in the classified shadows of military bureaucracy, decisions had been made that would test every assumption about loyalty, sacrifice, and the price of keeping secrets in a world where the dead sometimes refuse to stay buried. The morning that had started as routine training was about to become the most important flight of Rodriguez's career, and possibly the last mission of his life. The woman flying beside him had secrets written in contrails across a sky that suddenly felt too small to contain the storm that was coming. The first clue came when he noticed her aircraft's tail number. It was Alina's old bird, the same F-15C she'd been flying when ground control lost contact 18 months ago. According to official records, that aircraft had been destroyed in a crash over the Sierra Nevada mountains, its wreckage scattered across an avalanche zone too dangerous for recovery operations. Yet here it was, flying with the confidence of an aircraft that had never touched the ground wrong, its engines humming with the satisfied purr of perfectly maintained machinery. Rodriguez keyed his radio again, his voice steadier than he felt. "Alina, where the hell have you been?" The question carried years of grief, months of wondering what he could have done differently, and the desperate hope that the woman who'd been like a daughter to him might actually be breathing somewhere in the vast Nevada sky. The response came immediately, but it wasn't what he expected. "Marcus, I need you to listen very carefully. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but every word is true. I've been flying missions that don't exist for a government program that officially ended 20 years ago. The crash was staged. My death was manufactured. And right now, there are people who would kill us both to keep those secrets buried in the desert where they belong." Rodriguez felt the world tilt sideways around his aircraft. Alina's voice carried the weight of 18 months' worth of classified missions, covert operations that existed in the gray spaces between official policy and national necessity. The implications hit him like a surface-to-air missile, explosive and impossible to ignore. "Control, Viper 1-1 requesting immediate divert to secure frequency." His words were carefully chosen, designed to sound routine, while communicating urgency to anyone listening who understood the coded language of military operations. But the response from ground control carried an edge that suggested Rodriguez wasn't the only one having a difficult morning. "Negative, Viper 1-1. Maintain current frequency and proceed as briefed. Any deviation from flight plan will result in immediate disciplinary action." The transmission felt rehearsed, as if someone had been expecting this conversation and prepared official responses designed to shut down questions before they could fully form. Alina's laugh crackled through the radio, carrying none of the warmth Rodriguez remembered. "They've been monitoring our communication since you spotted me, Marcus. Every word we've spoken has been recorded, analyzed, and forwarded to people whose job titles don't appear on any organizational chart. We have maybe 10 minutes before they scramble interceptors to ensure this conversation never happened." The desert below seemed to expand as Rodriguez processed the scope of what Alina was describing. 18 months of believing she was dead. 18 months of carrying guilt over a training accident that apparently never occurred. 18 months of living in a world where his best student had been erased from existence by people who treated human lives like classified documents to be filed away and forgotten. But Alina Vasquez had never been the type to stay filed away quietly. Even as a lieutenant fresh out of flight school, she possessed an inner fire that burned too bright for anyone to extinguish completely. She challenged assumptions, questioned orders that didn't make tactical sense, and earned the grudging respect of officers who'd initially dismissed her as another political correctness promotion. "What do you need from me?" Rodriguez asked, the question emerging before his conscious mind could evaluate the wisdom of asking it. 22 years of military service had taught him to recognize moments when loyalty mattered more than regulations, when doing the right thing required accepting consequences that would echo through the rest of his career. Alina's aircraft rolled inverted for 3 seconds, a gesture Rodriguez recognized as her old way of saying thank you during training flights when radio silence was required. When she rolled level again, her voice carried determination mixed with something that might have been relief. "I need you to help me disappear again, Marcus. But this time, I'm taking some insurance with me. Files that prove what they've been doing in the name of national security. evidence of missions that violate every treaty we've signed and every principle we swore to defend. The kind of information that ends careers and starts congressional investigations. Rodriguez understood immediately why Alina needed to vanish. The kind of people who could fake a pilot's death and stage an aircraft crash wouldn't hesitate to arrange a real accident if their secrets were threatened. But he also understood why she couldn't simply disappear quietly. Alina had always possessed a moral compass that pointed toward truth regardless of personal cost, and that compass was now pointing her toward a collision course with forces that preferred darkness to accountability. The radio crackled with a new voice, calm and professional in a way that made Rodriguez's skin crawl. Viper 1-1, this is Blackwater Control. You are ordered to break formation and return to base immediately. The aircraft you believe to be Captain Vasquez is an unauthorized intrusion into restricted airspace. Lethal force is authorized if compliance is not immediate. Rodriguez felt time compress around him like the G-forces of a high-performance turn. Blackwater Control wasn't a call sign he recognized, but the authority in that voice suggested connections that reached far above his security clearance level. These weren't people who made idle threats or worried about paperwork after shooting down aircraft in American airspace. Alina's response came before Rodriguez could formulate words. Blackwater Control, Ghost Lead. Your authorization ended the moment you decided to murder American service members to protect corrupt officials. Consider this my resignation from your unofficial roster. Her transmission carried finality that reminded Rodriguez of closing arguments in courts-martial, the kind of definitive statements that changed everything permanently. The next few seconds stretched like hours as Rodriguez calculated odds, weighed loyalties, and prepared to make a decision that would define the remainder of his life. Alina had been more than just his student. She'd been proof that excellence could emerge from unexpected places, that the best pilots weren't always the ones who looked like recruiting posters or graduated from service academies with perfect records. Below them, the Nevada desert held its secrets in silence, but above them, two pilots prepared to challenge the assumption that those secrets were worth more than human lives. The morning sun climbed higher, painting contrails against a sky that was about to witness either the most important flight in American military history or the tragic conclusion of two careers that had demanded too much integrity for their own good. The radio remained silent for nearly 30 seconds, a pause that spoke volumes about the frantic communications occurring on frequencies Rodriguez couldn't monitor. When the transmission finally came, it carried the weight of decisions made in rooms where democracy was a theoretical concept rather than a practical constraint. All units. Two F-15 aircraft in Grid 77 are declared hostile. Weapons-free authorization granted. Engage and destroy immediately. The words were spoken with bureaucratic precision, as if ordering the deaths of American military pilots was just another item on someone's daily schedule. Rodriguez felt his training take over, muscle memory and experience combining to transform emotion into action. His hands moved across controls with the efficiency of thousands of hours in similar aircraft, preparing his Strike Eagle for combat against opponents who possessed intimate knowledge of American tactics and technology. But this wasn't a fair fight by any definition. Alina was flying alone in an aircraft that had supposedly been destroyed, while Rodriguez commanded one of the most advanced air superiority fighters ever built. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to defend a dead woman from living men who claimed to represent his own government. Alina had taught him that sometimes the right choice looked wrong from every official perspective, that integrity occasionally demanded accepting consequences that couldn't be calculated in terms of career advancement or pension benefits. Alina, we need to move. Now. His words carried urgency sharpened by the knowledge that somewhere in the Nevada sky, other pilots were launching with orders to kill them both. Good pilots, probably, men and women who believed they were defending national security against unknown threats. Rodriguez had been one of those pilots once, before he learned that the biggest threats to national security sometimes wore uniforms and carried clearances that placed them beyond accountability. Alina's response came with engine noise that suggested her F-15 was already accelerating beyond normal operational parameters. "Marcus, there's something you need to know before this gets worse. The program I've been flying for isn't just about classified missions. They've been developing technology that makes our current aircraft look like museum pieces. What you're about to see will change everything you think you know about American air power." The words hung in the radio silence that followed, carrying implications that made Rodriguez's previous assumptions about military technology seem suddenly naive. Alina had always been ahead of her time, but what she was describing suggested she'd been flying missions in aircraft that existed decades ahead of anything in official inventory. The confirmation came 60 seconds later when Rodriguez's radar scope erupted with contacts that shouldn't have been possible. 6 aircraft approaching from 3 different vectors, moving at speeds that pushed the boundaries of what current engine technology could achieve. Their profiles matched no aircraft in any identification manual, but their intent was crystal clear from their formation and approach angles. "Jesus Christ, Alina, what have you gotten us into?" Rodriguez's question carried the weight of a man watching his understanding of reality dissolve like contrails in high-altitude wind. The aircraft approaching them represented technology that officially didn't exist, deployed by an organization that claimed not to exist, in defense of secrets that were supposedly too important to acknowledge. Alina's laugh carried no humor, only the bitter recognition of someone who'd spent 18 months learning exactly how deep American military secrecy could go. "Welcome to the black world, Marcus, where the Constitution is a suggestion and oversight is a 4-letter word. The question now is whether we can survive long enough to tell someone who might actually care about the difference between protecting national security and protecting the people who profit from endless wars." The Nevada desert below stretched endlessly, its ancient geology indifferent to the human drama playing out in the sky above. But that drama was about to reveal secrets that would force America to confront uncomfortable truths about the price of maintaining technological superiority in a world where the definitions of friend and enemy changed faster than political administrations. Rodriguez checked his weapon systems one final time, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether Alina's secrets died with them in the desert or survived to challenge an establishment that had grown comfortable operating beyond the reach of democratic accountability. The woman flying beside him had already died once for those secrets. The question now was whether they were worth dying for again, or whether survival might offer a chance to expose the truth to people who still believed in quaint concepts like constitutional oversight and military accountability. The radio crackled with a transmission that would force both pilots to confront the reality that their government had become something their oaths of service never anticipated defending. But that transmission would also reveal that Alina Vasquez had spent 18 months preparing for exactly this moment, accumulating evidence and allies in preparation for a confrontation that would either reform American military operations or destroy the careers of everyone involved in trying. The morning sun climbed higher, painting the Nevada sky in shades of gold and blue that reminded Rodriguez of Alina's squadron patch from their training days together. That patch had featured an eagle rising from flames, with the motto "Phoenix Rising" embroidered beneath spread wings. At the time, it had seemed like typical military bravado, the kind of inspirational symbolism that looked good on recruiting materials and helped maintain morale during difficult training. Now, watching Alina's aircraft execute maneuvers that pushed the boundaries of aerodynamic possibility, Rodriguez realized that her patch had been less about symbolism and more about prophecy. Alina Vasquez had risen from the flames of her staged death, and the fire she carried now threatened to burn down an entire structure of classified programs and covert operations that had grown like cancer in the shadows of American military power. The first hostile aircraft appeared on Rodriguez's scope at a range of 40 miles, closing at a speed that suggested engines significantly more powerful than anything in official inventory. Its profile remained indistinct on his radar, as if the aircraft had been designed specifically to confuse targeting systems and make identification difficult even for advanced military sensors. Contact bearing 090, Angels unknown, closing fast. Rodriguez's report was automatic muscle memory from thousands of training exercises, but his voice carried the tension of someone who understood that this exercise would have permanent consequences. There would be no debriefing afterward, no lessons learned conference where mistakes could be acknowledged and corrected. Success meant survival, and failure meant becoming another classified footnote in files that would never see congressional oversight. Alina's response revealed preparation that went far beyond anything she could have accomplished in the 18 months since her official death. "Marcus, I need you to trust me completely for the next 10 minutes. Follow my lead exactly, no matter how impossible what you see appears to be. The aircraft I'm flying has capabilities that will seem like science fiction, but every system has been tested and proven in combat situations you'll never read about in any official report." The implications hit Rodriguez like turbulence at high altitude, sudden and disorienting. Alina hadn't just been hiding for 18 months. She'd been training in aircraft that represented technological advances decades ahead of anything he'd imagined possible. The military-industrial complex that built America's official air superiority had apparently been operating a parallel development program that made their acknowledged achievements look primitive by comparison. "Alina, what the hell are you flying?" The question emerged before professional discipline could suppress personal curiosity. Rodriguez had spent his entire career pushing the performance envelope of advanced aircraft, but what Alina was describing suggested she'd been operating beyond that envelope in ways that redefined the possible. Her response came with engine sounds that didn't match any power plant Rodriguez recognized. "The designation is classified beyond your clearance level, but the pilots call it the Wraith. Think of it as what happens when you take everything we learned from captured foreign technology and combine it with advances we haven't admitted to developing. It's fast enough to outrun most missiles, maneuverable enough to dogfight with anything currently flying, and stealthy enough to appear and disappear from radar at will." Rodriguez processed this information while watching his own radar scope track the approaching hostile aircraft. If Alina was flying technology that advanced, then the forces sent to eliminate them were probably equipped with similar capabilities. This wasn't going to be a conventional engagement where superior training and tactics could overcome technological disadvantages. This was going to be a battle between different generations of secret aircraft, fought by pilots whose existence was too classified to acknowledge even in death. The radio crackled with a new transmission that carried authority Rodriguez recognized from his highest clearance briefings. "Wraith 11, this is Control. You are ordered to stand down immediately and return to base. Your unauthorized departure has been noted and will be addressed through appropriate channels. Continue current actions and you will be classified as a rogue asset and engaged accordingly." Alina's response carried the weight of 18 months spent learning exactly what appropriate channels meant in the world of unacknowledged military programs. "Control, Wraith 11. Your appropriate channels included staging my death to prevent congressional testimony about war crimes committed under classified authorizations. Consider this my posthumous testimony, delivered at altitude to an audience that can't be silenced by convenient accidents." The words hung in the radio silence that followed, carrying accusations that would end careers and start investigations if they reached the wrong ears. Rodriguez understood immediately why Alina had chosen this method of revelation. Broadcasting her accusations over military frequencies meant they would be recorded, analyzed, and potentially leaked by personnel who might not understand their significance until it was too late to suppress them. But Alina's strategy also ensured that powerful people would commit significant resources to preventing those recordings from reaching anyone with the authority and integrity to act on them. The aircraft approaching their position represented that commitment, and their pilots had probably been briefed on threats to national security. Without being told, they were hunting American military personnel, whose only crime was possessing inconvenient knowledge about classified operations. Marcus, in about 30 seconds, you're going to see me do something that violates every principle of physics you learned in flight school. When that happens, I need you to stay exactly where you are and let me handle the initial engagement. What you're about to witness is why they were willing to fake my death rather than risk me sharing this technology with congressional oversight committees. Rodriguez felt his grip tighten on the flight controls as he prepared to witness capabilities that officially didn't exist. Alina had always been an exceptional pilot, but what she was describing suggested she'd been operating aircraft that made exceptional piloting look routine. The technology gap between official military capability and the systems Alina had been flying apparently represented advances that would reshape global air power if they became widely known. The demonstration began with Alina's aircraft simply vanishing from his radar scope while remaining visible through his canopy. One moment she was there, maintaining formation with mathematical precision, and the next moment his instruments insisted she had never existed. But Rodriguez could see her F-15 exactly where it had been, its gray-blue camouflage unchanged, its position relative to his aircraft constant. "Alina, you just disappeared from my scope completely." His words carried the confusion of someone watching technology that challenged basic assumptions about radar detection and electronic warfare. Rodriguez had flown against the most advanced stealth aircraft in American inventory, but none of them could simply vanish from radar while remaining visible to the naked eye. Her response revealed capabilities that made traditional stealth technology look primitive. Active radar cancellation, Marcus. Instead of just absorbing or deflecting radar energy, the Wraith generates counter-signals that convince enemy radar you're not there. It works against multiple targeting frequencies simultaneously and can be adjusted in real time to counter adaptive radar systems. Rodriguez understood immediately why this technology had been classified beyond congressional oversight. Aircraft that could become invisible to radar at will would reshape military operations on a global scale. Air defenses that relied on radar detection would become useless overnight. The strategic balance that prevented major power conflicts would shift dramatically in favor of whoever possessed this capability. But understanding the technology also revealed why Alina's knowledge had made her too dangerous to live. Congressional testimony about active radar cancellation would lead to questions about other classified capabilities, other secret programs, other technological advances that existed in the shadows beyond democratic accountability. The people who controlled these programs had invested too much in secrecy to risk exposure through official oversight. The first hostile aircraft appeared on Rodriguez's scope at 15 miles, its profile finally clear enough for identification. What he saw made his blood run cold. The approaching aircraft wasn't just advanced. It was identical to Alina's Wraith, suggesting that multiple examples of this technology existed and were being used against American military personnel who asked inconvenient questions about classified operations. "Alina, we've got company, and they're flying the same aircraft you are." Rodriguez's words carried the weight of someone realizing that this engagement would be fought between identical weapon systems, where victory would depend entirely on pilot skill and tactical innovation rather than technological superiority. Alina's response revealed preparation that went far beyond anything she could have accomplished alone. "I know, Marcus. There were 6 Wraiths built under the program. I've been flying one for 18 months. The other 5 are crewed by pilots who believe they're defending national security from foreign threats. What they don't know is that their handlers have been using them to eliminate American military personnel who have learned too much about operations that violate both domestic and international law. The implications hit Rodriguez like a hypersonic missile, fast and devastating. Alina wasn't just fighting to expose classified technology. She was fighting to prevent that technology from being used to murder American service members who possessed inconvenient knowledge about illegal military operations. The pilots approaching their position weren't villains. They were patriots who'd been lied to about the nature of their missions and the identity of their targets. This realization changed everything about the engagement Rodriguez was about to enter. These weren't enemy pilots he could engage without moral reservation. These were fellow American military personnel who'd been manipulated into committing murder by people who treated constitutional oversight as an obstacle to operational efficiency. Killing them would be both tactically necessary and morally devastating. Alina, these pilots don't know what they're really doing, do they? Rodriguez's question carried the weight of someone who understood that the most effective weapons in any conflict were often the ones that didn't know they were being used. Good people could be convinced to commit terrible acts if they believed those acts served a greater good, and Alina's pursuers had probably been told they were protecting national security from unknown threats. Her response confirmed his worst fears about the moral complexity of their situation. They've been told I'm a foreign agent who stole classified technology and murdered the real Alina Vasquez. Their briefings include forged intelligence that makes me look like a terrorist with access to advanced weapons systems. They think they're avenging my death, not hunting the actual me. Rodriguez felt the weight of this revelation settle over him like the G-forces of a steep dive. The people who'd staged Alina's death had been thorough in their deception, creating a narrative that would motivate good pilots to hunt her without questioning the morality of their orders. They'd turned her fake death into a weapon against her, using the loyalty and dedication of American military personnel to eliminate someone whose only crime was possessing evidence of their criminal activities. The radio crackled with transmissions between the approaching aircraft, their communications encrypted but audible as electronic noise that suggested coordination and tactical planning. Rodriguez recognized the professional efficiency in their radio discipline, the kind of communication patterns that marked experienced pilots who trained together extensively and trusted each other's capabilities implicitly. "Marcus, I need you to understand something about what's going to happen next." Alina's voice carried the weight of someone who'd spent 18 months preparing for this moment, calculating variables and planning contingencies for an engagement that would determine whether classified crimes remained buried or became public knowledge. "The pilots hunting us are good people who have been fed false information. If we can disable their aircraft without killing them, they might become allies when they learn the truth about what they've been asked to do." Rodriguez understood immediately why Alina was sharing this information. She was asking him to fight American military personnel with restraint, to risk his own life to preserve the lives of pilots who were trying to kill them both. It was exactly the kind of impossible moral calculation that had defined Alina's approach to military service from the beginning. The willingness to accept personal risk to minimize harm to people who didn't deserve to become collateral damage in conflicts they didn't fully understand. But understanding Alina's moral position didn't make her request any easier to fulfill. Disabling advanced military aircraft without killing their pilots required precision that would be difficult to achieve under ideal circumstances, much less during a high-speed engagement where a moment's hesitation could result in death for everyone involved. Alina was asking him to attempt something that would challenge the limits of his skill, while fighting for his life against opponents who had no such moral constraints. The first hostile aircraft reached weapons range, while Rodriguez was still processing the ethical implications of Alina's request. His radar warning receiver erupted with the electronic signature of advanced air-to-air missiles being targeted against his aircraft, the harsh tone that every fighter pilot learned to interpret as immediate danger requiring evasive action. Missile launch, brake right. Rodriguez's warning came automatically, muscle memory from thousands of hours of training taking over while his conscious mind struggled to process the reality that American military personnel were shooting at him, with weapons designed to kill other Americans. The missile tracking him had been built by American contractors, programmed by American engineers, and launched by American pilots who believed they were defending their country from threats they'd been trained to eliminate without question. Alina's aircraft vanished from both radar and visual contact as Rodriguez threw his Strike Eagle into a defensive turn that pushed the aircraft to its structural limits. G-forces that felt like being stepped on by a giant compressed his chest and made every breath a conscious effort. But the missile tracking him required maneuvers that prioritized survival over comfort. His aircraft's defensive systems activated automatically, dispensing chaff and flares while jamming frequencies that might confuse the incoming weapon's guidance system. The missile that should have killed him passed harmlessly through empty space where his aircraft had been 3 seconds earlier, its warhead exploding in a brilliant flash that painted the Nevada desert in artificial daylight. Rodriguez had evaded death by margins measured in feet and milliseconds, but the engagement was just beginning. 5 more hostile aircraft remained active, and their pilots would learn from their first failure to achieve a quick kill. "Alina, where the hell are you?" Rodriguez's question carried the urgency of someone who just survived an attempt on his life and needed to know whether his only ally was still capable of providing support. The sky around him seemed empty except for hostile aircraft that possessed capabilities similar to Alina's Wraith, advanced technology operated by pilots who'd been trained to use it against targets they believed threatened American national security. Her response came from everywhere and nowhere, carried by radio frequencies that seemed to originate from multiple directions simultaneously. "I'm right here, Marcus, but I'm also behind the lead aircraft, above the second element and below the trail bird. The Wraith doesn't just cancel radar, it can project false signals that make one aircraft appear to be in multiple locations while actually being somewhere else entirely." Rodriguez felt his understanding of electronic warfare expand to accommodate capabilities that seemed more like magic than technology. Alina wasn't just invisible to radar. She was actively manipulating the electromagnetic spectrum to confuse enemy sensors in ways that made traditional stealth technology look primitive. She'd become a ghost in the machine, present everywhere her enemies looked while actually being somewhere they couldn't anticipate. The demonstration of her capabilities came in the form of chaos among the hostile aircraft. Their formation dissolved as pilots reacted to threats that appeared to be attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. Rodriguez watched professional discipline crumble as experienced aviators found themselves fighting an enemy that existed in too many places at once, their training inadequate for combat against technology that redefined the possible. "Brake left, brake left." Missiles inbound from multiple vectors. The transmission came from one of the hostile pilots, his voice carrying the stress of someone whose instruments were providing information that didn't match visual reality. Rodriguez recognized the tone of a competent pilot being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his training and experience. Alina's response demonstrated capabilities that justified 18 months of classified development and testing. She appeared behind the lead hostile aircraft for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to disable its engines with cannon fire that was precisely targeted to avoid hitting the cockpit or critical life support systems. The enemy pilot ejected safely as his aircraft began an uncontrolled descent toward the Nevada desert, his parachute opening in a blue sky that suddenly seemed too small to contain the technological marvels fighting for control of it. 1 down, 4 to go. Alina's transmission carried professional satisfaction rather than bloodlust, the tone of someone who'd accomplished a difficult task without causing unnecessary casualties. She'd proven that disabling enemy aircraft without killing their pilots was possible, but Rodriguez understood that such precision would become increasingly difficult as the remaining hostile pilots adapted their tactics to counter her capabilities. The radio erupted with transmissions from the surviving hostile aircraft, as their pilots processed the loss of their leader and attempted to develop new tactics for engaging an enemy that could appear and disappear at will. Rodriguez recognized the professional discipline in their communications, the kind of rapid tactical adaptation that marked experienced military pilots who've been trained to overcome technological disadvantages through superior coordination and mutual support. All Reaper flight elements, this is Reaper 2. Lead is down, pilot safe. Switch to alternate targeting frequencies and maintain formation discipline. Target appears to have advanced stealth and electronic warfare capabilities. Recommend coordinated engagement from multiple vectors to prevent individual targeting. Rodriguez understood immediately that the hostile pilots were adapting their tactics to counter Alina's technological advantages. By attacking from multiple directions simultaneously, they could force her to choose which threats to address, while leaving herself vulnerable to the others. It was exactly the kind of tactical innovation that made American military pilots dangerous opponents, even when facing superior technology. Alina's response revealed that she'd anticipated this adaptation and prepared countermeasures that went beyond anything Rodriguez had imagined possible. Marcus, I need you to stay exactly where you are for the next 60 seconds. What you're about to see will look impossible, but every maneuver has been tested and proven in combat situations that officially never happened. Rodriguez felt time slow around him as he prepared to witness capabilities that would redefine his understanding of aerial combat. Alina had spent 18 months learning to operate technology that existed decades ahead of anything in official inventory, and she was about to demonstrate why that technology had been deemed too dangerous for congressional oversight or public acknowledgement. The demonstration began with Alina's aircraft appearing simultaneously in 4 different locations, each apparent position engaging a different hostile aircraft with weapons that seemed to fire independently of pilot control. Rodriguez watched in amazement as the Wraith fought like a squadron rather than a single aircraft, its advanced systems creating the illusion of numerical superiority, while actually maintaining position relative to threats that couldn't determine which target was real. 2 more hostile aircraft went down within 30 seconds, their pilots ejecting safely as precisely targeted cannon fire disabled engines and flight controls without threatening crew compartments. Alina's marksmanship was beyond anything Rodriguez had witnessed, but he understood that her accuracy was enhanced by targeting systems that existed far beyond anything in acknowledged American inventory. Jesus Christ, Alina, how is this possible? Rodriguez's question carried the amazement of someone watching technology that challenged basic assumptions about physics and engineering. Alina's aircraft was performing maneuvers that should have been impossible, engaging multiple targets simultaneously, while maintaining stealth characteristics that made conventional air-to-air combat look primitive by comparison. Her response revealed the scope of technological advancement that had been hidden from congressional oversight and public acknowledgement. The Wraith program combined advances in materials science, propulsion technology, electronic warfare systems, and artificial intelligence that individually would have revolutionized military aviation. When combined in a single platform, they create capabilities that seem impossible, because most people don't understand how far American military technology has actually advanced beyond what we acknowledge publicly. Rodriguez processed this information while watching the final 2 hostile aircraft attempt to coordinate an attack against an enemy they couldn't reliably track or target. Their pilots were executing textbook tactics with professional precision, but their training had been designed for conventional warfare against opponents who played by rules that Alina's technology had made obsolete. The radio crackled with increasingly desperate transmissions from the surviving hostile pilots as they struggled to adapt their tactics to counter capabilities that existed outside their experience and training. Rodriguez recognized the frustration in their voices, the anger of competent professionals who'd been placed in an impossible situation by people who'd failed to provide adequate intelligence about their opponent's capabilities. Reaper 3, Reaper 4. Target is using technology beyond current threat assessment parameters. Recommend immediate withdrawal and request for additional assets with enhanced capabilities. The transmission carried the weight of professional military personnel, acknowledging that they'd been outmatched by technology. Their briefings hadn't prepared them to engage. Alina's response demonstrated the moral complexity that had defined her approach to military service from the beginning. Instead of pressing her technological advantage to eliminate the remaining threats, she chose to reveal information that would force the hostile pilots to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of their mission and the identity of their target. Reaper 3, Reaper 4. This is Captain Alina Vasquez, serial number 470-1239847, reporting for duty 18 months after my death was staged to prevent congressional testimony about war crimes committed under classified authorization. The aircraft you've been ordered to destroy contains evidence of illegal military operations that violate both domestic and international law. Your handlers have told you I'm a foreign agent, but I'm actually the American pilot whose murder you think you're avenging. The radio silence that followed Alina's transmission lasted nearly 30 seconds, long enough for the implications of her words to penetrate the operational focus that had driven the engagement. Rodriguez could imagine the confusion and moral conflict her revelation was creating among pilots who'd been told they were hunting a terrorist, but were actually pursuing a fellow American military officer, whose only crime was possessing inconvenient knowledge about classified crimes. When the transmissions resumed, they carried the weight of American military personnel confronting the possibility that they'd been manipulated into committing murder against one of their own. Control, Reaper 3. Request immediate verification of target identity and mission authorization. If the target is actually Captain Vasquez, we need clarification on why we were told she was killed 18 months ago. The response from ground control revealed the desperation of people whose carefully constructed deceptions were collapsing under the weight of evidence they couldn't suppress or discredit. Reaper 3, Reaper 4. Target is using psychological warfare techniques designed to create doubt and hesitation. Maintain mission focus and eliminate the threat immediately. Any further communication with the target will result in disciplinary action and possible court-martial proceedings. Rodriguez recognized the tone of authority that brooked no questioning, the kind of command presence that demanded obedience without explanation. But he also recognized the fear beneath that authority, the panic of people who understood that their control over the situation was dissolving faster than they could adapt their strategies to contain it. Alina's next transmission carried evidence that would force everyone listening to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of American military operations in the post-9/11 era. Reaper Flight. I'm transmitting authentication codes and personnel records that prove my identity. Cross-reference serial number 470-1239847 with your database. Check the voice print analysis against Captain Alina Vasquez's service record. Verify that the woman you think you're avenging is actually the woman you're trying to kill. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a minute as the surviving hostile pilots processed information that challenged everything they'd been told about their mission. Rodriguez could imagine the confusion and moral conflict Alina's revelation was creating among people who dedicated their lives to serving their country, but were discovering that their service had been manipulated to protect crimes committed in America's name. When the response finally came, it carried the weight of American military personnel confronting evidence that their own government had been using them as weapons against fellow service members. Control, Reaper 3. Authentication codes confirm target identity as Captain Alina Vasquez, reported killed in action 18 months ago. Request immediate explanation for discrepancy between official records and current operational parameters. The response from ground control revealed desperation masquerading as authority, the kind of panic that emerged when carefully constructed lies encountered inconvenient facts. Reaper 3, you are experiencing electronic warfare attacks designed to confuse your instruments and compromise your mission effectiveness. Ignore all transmissions from the target and engage immediately. This is a direct order from command authority that supersedes all previous briefings. Rodriguez understood that Alina had forced her pursuers into an impossible position. They could either follow orders to kill someone they now knew was a fellow American military officer, or they could question those orders and risk court-martial proceedings that would destroy their careers and potentially result in criminal prosecution. It was exactly the kind of moral trap that separated people who served principles from people who served power. Alina's response demonstrated why she'd been willing to accept the risks of staging her own resurrection. Reaper Flight, the people giving you orders have been using classified military programs to eliminate American service members who possess evidence of war crimes. Your choice now is whether to become accessories to murder or to help expose crimes that have been hidden behind classifications that were never intended to protect criminal activity. The weight of Alina's words settled over the Nevada sky like the silence that follows thunder, carrying implications that would force everyone involved to choose between loyalty to their oaths of service and obedience to authority that had exceeded its constitutional mandate. Rodriguez felt the moment crystallize around him, understanding that history was being written in contrails and radio transmissions that would either expose the truth or be buried with everyone who'd witnessed it. The next transmission came from an unexpected source, carrying authority that superseded everyone who'd been involved in the engagement. All units, this is General Patricia Morrison, commanding officer of Air Combat Command. Cease all hostile actions immediately and maintain current positions. Captain Vasquez, you are ordered to land at Nellis Air Force Base for immediate debriefing. All personnel involved in this incident are hereby placed under my direct authority pending investigation of allegations that require congressional oversight. Rodriguez felt relief wash over him like the cool air that followed a thunderstorm. General Morrison's intervention meant that Alina's evidence would receive the kind of high-level attention that could bypass the people who'd been using classified programs to eliminate inconvenient witnesses. But he also understood that powerful forces would mobilize to discredit Alina's testimony and eliminate evidence that threatened careers and revealed crimes that had been committed in the name of national security. Alina's response carried the satisfaction of someone who'd spent 18 months planning for exactly this moment. General Morrison, Captain Alina Vasquez reporting as ordered. I have in my possession documented evidence of illegal military operations conducted under classified authorization, including the staged deaths of American military personnel who posed threats to operational security. I request immediate protective custody and congressional testimony under oath. The radio crackled with transmissions from multiple sources as the implications of Alina's survival and testimony spread through military command structures that had grown comfortable operating beyond congressional oversight. Rodriguez recognized the sound of an establishment being forced to confront accountability, the electronic noise that emerged when people who'd committed crimes in the name of national security realized that their actions might finally face scrutiny from people who still believed in constitutional principles. General Morrison's next transmission carried the weight of command authority backed by constitutional mandate. Captain Vasquez, your request for protective custody is granted. All evidence in your possession will be secured and reviewed by personnel with appropriate clearances and congressional liaison authority. Any attempts to interfere with this investigation will be considered obstruction of military justice and prosecuted accordingly. Rodriguez understood that Alina had achieved something remarkable. She'd forced the military establishment to acknowledge crimes that had been hidden behind classifications designed to protect national security rather than criminal activity. Her 18 months of careful planning and evidence gathering had created a situation where powerful people would face consequences for treating American military personnel as expendable assets in operations that existed beyond democratic accountability. The engagement that had begun as a hunt had become a moment of reckoning, forcing everyone involved to confront uncomfortable truths about the relationship between military service and democratic principles. Alina had proven that some secrets were too important to remain buried, that some crimes required exposure regardless of the personal cost to the people brave enough to demand accountability. As the hostile aircraft began their descent toward Nellis Air Force Base under General Morrison's direct orders, Rodriguez felt the weight of witnessing history being made by someone who'd refused to let her death become another convenient silence in files that would never see congressional oversight. Alina Vasquez had risen from the flames of her staged death to demand justice for crimes committed in America's name, and her testimony would force the nation to confront uncomfortable questions about the price of maintaining technological superiority in a world where the definitions of patriotism and treason had become dangerously fluid. The Nevada desert below stretched endlessly, its ancient geology indifferent to the human drama that had played out in the sky above. But that drama had revealed truths that would echo through American military and political establishments for years to come, forcing conversations about oversight and accountability that had been postponed too long in the name of operational security and national necessity. Alina's aircraft became visible on Rodriguez's scope as she deactivated the stealth systems that had made her seem like a ghost in the machine. The technology that had allowed her to survive 18 months of hunting by people who preferred their crimes to remain buried was being voluntarily surrendered to ensure that her testimony would receive the protection and attention it deserved. Marcus, thank you for trusting me when everyone else would have followed orders to shoot first and ask questions later. Alina's transmission carried gratitude mixed with exhaustion, the voice of someone who'd carried the weight of terrible knowledge for longer than any person should have to bear alone. What we did today will change everything about how America conducts classified military operations. Rodriguez understood that Alina was probably right about the long-term implications of their engagement. Congressional investigations would follow, careers would end, and classified programs would face the kind of oversight that had been systematically avoided through manipulation and intimidation. The technology Alina had been flying would become subject to democratic review rather than remaining hidden in shadows where accountability was a theoretical concept. But he also understood that the people who'd been using classified programs to eliminate inconvenient witnesses wouldn't surrender their power quietly. Alina's testimony would face challenges from lawyers and officials who specialized in protecting state secrets, and her evidence would be questioned by people whose careers depended on maintaining the fiction that American military operations always served legitimate national security interests. The flight back to Nellis Air Force Base passed in relative silence as both pilots processed the implications of what they'd accomplished and what they'd witnessed. Alina had proven that technological superiority meant nothing if it was used to protect crimes rather than defend constitutional principles. Rodriguez had learned that loyalty to oath of service sometimes required disobeying orders from people who'd forgotten that their authority derived from the Constitution rather than their security clearances. As they approached the runway where General Morrison's investigation would begin, Rodriguez felt the satisfaction of someone who'd chosen correctly when presented with an impossible moral calculation. Alina Vasquez had been worth saving, not just because she was a fellow pilot or because she possessed evidence of criminal activity, but because she represented principles that were worth defending regardless of personal cost. The landing gear extended with mechanical precision that reminded Rodriguez of the thousands of routine flights that had preceded this extraordinary morning. But routine would never again feel quite the same after witnessing technology that existed decades ahead of acknowledged American capabilities, and discovering that some of that technology had been used against American military personnel, whose only crime was asking uncomfortable questions about classified operations. Alina's aircraft touched down first, its landing flawless despite the stress of an engagement that had tested both pilot and machine beyond normal operational parameters. Rodriguez followed 30 seconds later, his Strike Eagle settling onto concrete that had witnessed countless training flights, but never one that had forced such fundamental questions about the relationship between military service and democratic accountability. The debriefing that followed would become legendary within circles that possessed sufficient clearance to know it had occurred. Alina's testimony, delivered under oath and protected by congressional liaison authority, would expose a network of classified programs that had operated beyond constitutional oversight for more than a decade. Her evidence would prove that American military technology had advanced far beyond public knowledge, and that some of that advancement had been used to protect crimes rather than defend legitimate national security interests. General Morrison's investigation would expand beyond Alina's specific case to examine the broader question of how classified military programs had been allowed to operate beyond democratic accountability. The people who'd been using those programs to eliminate inconvenient witnesses would face consequences that had been systematically avoided through manipulation of oversight mechanisms and intimidation of potential witnesses. Rodriguez would spend the next several months providing testimony to congressional committees and military investigators who struggled to understand the scope of what Alina had exposed. His role in her survival would be acknowledged in classified commendations that he could never discuss publicly, but the knowledge that he'd helped prevent the murder of a fellow service member would provide satisfaction that transcended official recognition. The technology Alina had been flying would eventually be declassified and integrated into official military inventory, but only after oversight mechanisms were established to ensure that advanced capabilities would serve legitimate national security interests rather than protecting criminal activity. The Wraith program would become a case study in the dangers of allowing technological development to proceed without adequate congressional review. Alina herself would disappear back into classified programs, but this time as someone who worked to ensure that advanced military capabilities served constitutional principles rather than circumventing them. Her staged death had been transformed into a genuine resurrection, not just of her career, but of accountability mechanisms that had been systematically undermined by people who preferred operating beyond democratic oversight. The morning that had begun as routine training had become a watershed moment in American military history, forcing conversations about oversight and accountability that would reshape classified operations for decades to come. Alina Vasquez had proven that some secrets were too important to remain buried, that some crimes required exposure regardless of the institutional damage that truth might cause. Years later, when Rodriguez looked back on that morning over the Nevada desert, he would remember it as the day he learned that patriotism sometimes required disobeying orders from people who'd forgotten that their authority derived from the Constitution rather than their security clearances. Alina had taught him that the most important battles weren't always fought against foreign enemies, but sometimes against domestic threats to the democratic principles that military service was supposed to defend. The sky above Nevada would continue to witness training flights and classified operations, but with oversight mechanisms that Alina's courage had forced into existence. Her legacy would be measured not in technological achievements or combat victories, but in the restoration of accountability to classified programs that had grown too comfortable operating beyond constitutional review. The Eagles would continue to fly, but with the knowledge that their flight was subject to oversight by people who remembered that military power existed to serve democratic principles rather than replacing them. Elena Vasquez had risen from the flames of her staged death to ensure that resurrection was possible, not just for individual pilots, but for the constitutional principles that gave meaning to their service. In the end, the formation she'd flown wasn't just legendary because of its technical precision or tactical effectiveness. It was legendary because it had restored the connection between military excellence and democratic accountability, proving that the two concepts were complementary rather than contradictory. The sky was big enough for both technological advancement and constitutional oversight, and Alina had proven that the best pilots were those who served both masters with equal dedication and skill.